Hey, what's up, Vox&Hops heads? I'm Matt, the vocalist of Cryptopsy. You listen to my podcast, Vox&Hops, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians to talk about their lives, music, and craft beer. I hope that you guys have had a great week. I have had a great week. I've been back at work. In case you've missed it, I take care of little children in early childhood education. This has been my first week back at work in the world that is COVID-19. It has been different. It has been interesting. It has been something that I'm getting used to. And the more that I keep going with that, the more that I realize that dropping 3 episodes a week will be difficult. So I'm announcing it right now. I love doing 3 episodes a week. It's something that I would like to continue doing. But as of next week, I am going to be transitioning back to a 2-episode-a-week format. And that is going to be on Tuesdays and Fridays. I feel like that will fit the new reality, which is me back at work during COVID. So I hope you guys forgive me and understand that. I have a bunch of episodes, a bunch of interviews already done that I can't wait to get out to you. But for me to make it happen and get it out there, it's going to be 2 episodes a week. Last night was crazy. Another Vox&Hops Thirsty Thursday virtual hang. I love these things. I hope you were there. If you weren't there, you should join us next week. And I have put the link in the description of this podcast. You should come. You should hang out. It's always a blast. On today's episode, I'm with John Matos of Abiotic. Here it is, Vox&Hops, episode number 152.
I warn you, what you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Today I'm with John Matos from Abiotic. It is great to be with you. It is always fun to hook up with a fellow victim of the podcast and a metal musician at that. So it's great to connect with people that truly understand our first world problems of being a podcaster at our level. So how are you? How have you been dealing with COVID-19? Before we started recording, you mentioned that you like to just pile on as much work as possible to cope with your stress. So let's just touch on that.
Yeah. Oh, Matt, thank you so much for having me. And that's really how I deal with stress. So during all of this crazy coronavirus stuff, I'm technically an essential worker, so I'm the general manager of a medical marijuana dispensary in Massachusetts. It's kind of what I do when I'm not doing the music stuff. So I'm still, we're still open. I'm still putting in my 40 hours a week. And just like you said, I started up a podcast, so the Big Shred podcast, which originally started as just a live stream from the Abiotic page and doing what you're doing basically, which is interviewing some folks in our industry, in our realm of underground metal, if you will. And it kind of started doing a little bit well for the first few streams. And I was like, you know what? I'm not busy enough. I've got to do something else, which again, that's to a fault where I'll do that to myself. My wife will tell me all the time, like, what are you doing this week? Like, why are you doing this to yourself? So started that up, and in probably the finishing stages of writing the new Abiotic album, we should be tracking, luckily because our drummer lives in Massachusetts where I live, we'll be tracking with him. So our tracking schedule shouldn't be affected by the virus or anything. So we should be tracking next month, actually.
Cool. That's amazing. You are a busy man. With everything, I completely understand that there's just not enough hours in a day anymore.
There's really not. And even busier than usual, and also at work trying to keep my staff safe, trying to keep our patients safe. So we're going through all kinds of things to ensure that people are practicing the social distancing, that we're not having too many people in the dispensary at one time. So I've got to think about all those logistics during all this shit as well.
It's a fucked up time, and it's going to be a fucked up time for quite a few more months, sadly. How is do you see more people coming into the medical marijuana place than before because everyone's at home?
I would say so, yeah. We've been busier than we have been. So we'll be open for a year next month, and we've been busier than ever. We've changed up our protocols to, like I mentioned before, to get people in and out as quickly as possible. So the world we live in, there's online orders to buy your pot. So we're doing online ordering and kind of just getting folks in and out. But yeah, we've been busier than ever. I think right now, obviously, people are at home more. If you're a beer drinker, you're probably drinking a bit more beer than you typically would. people who consume marijuana are doing it a little more than they typically would. And also it does help with anxiety, stress, or has been known to help with anxiety, stress, and depression and things like that. So I think people are needing their weed more than ever right now.
Speaking of tasting more beers than usual, Vox&Hops is all about hanging out with metal peeps, talking about their lives, music, and craft beer. What craft beer do you have on your side there? And then I'll tell you about mine.
I've got a UFO White, so I'm not, I guess, as maybe my palate isn't as developed as some other guys that enjoy the IPAs and all the kind of crazy ones. So if I'm drinking a beer, I'm usually drinking some kind of white or a Hefeweizen or something like that. So this one, your typical, just brewed with orange peel and coriander, and they are actually out of Boston, Massachusetts. So representing some local homies.
Yes, I've been saying it on every podcast recently that it's very important to support the businesses that you love locally. Everybody is struggling right now, so if you want things to be around after the COVID goes away and everything's back to normal, then you better support the things you love, such as the artists, the local businesses, and craft beer breweries. This is Echo Session Ale's Hazy Session IPA. It clocks in at a 3.9%. It is absolutely amazing. Huge shout out to JF Legency, their head brewer, one of their head brewers, for coming and hooking me up with a bunch of craft brews from Echo Session Ale so that I can share them with my guests. Sort of share them with my guests.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get to share one together at some point. Yeah.
Absolutely. As soon as we're together again, we're going to do this again.
Cheers,
Thanks,
bud.
Chad. Good. It's a little bit dank, tropical. Not quite creamy, but good. Excellent mouthfeel. Echo Session Ales really makes the best session beers here in Montreal, in Quebec. I am all about them. I normally don't like session beers because I find that it's missing like something, obviously the alcohol. But
the alcohol content, I was going to say.
But JF seems to find a way around that with all of the products that he's put out. So cheers.
Very
to
nice.
Good session beers.
That's a proper 2 p.m. East Coast time beer.
That's what I try to do, at least. Being a father. Are you a craft beer enthusiast?
I'd say so. I didn't grow up, but I didn't grow up drinking a lot of beer. I started doing a little bit more drinking probably in the last few years, and kind of trying to find the ones that I enjoy, and now I think I've kind of developed the palate for it and can pretty much drink everything, but I enjoy things on the lighter side, or I guess more of the wheat beers and things like that.
Do you remember your first beer?
I certainly remember my first beer. It was a Corona, because I'm from Miami, Florida.
Really? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was probably around the time, maybe a little bit before Abiotic got started. So we've been a band now for about 11 years. I started drinking pretty late. I did have some alcoholism in my family, so I kind of tried to steer clear for a little while and was like, maybe that's me too. So maybe I should just try and like stay away. I don't know if I'd be able to control myself. Obviously very young and naive. So, but did get together with the original drummer of Abiotic, and we were hanging out at his place, and he was drinking a Corona, and I was just like, you know what? Let me try one of those. And I was such a little bitch, dude. I couldn't even finish it. I was like, oh, whatever. Now I can drink a Corona like in 3 gulps. So
I agree, especially on a hot day with a lime.
Yeah, exactly.
Being in Miami, I'm sure that it was quite warm as usual.
Every single day, all the time.
You mentioned you're from Miami. First thing that came to my mind was Churchill's.
Oh, yeah. That's where I grew up playing.
What is your number one Churchill story? If anyone's wanting to, Churchill's is it's like a CBGB's atmosphere in Little Haiti. Haiti, Miami.
In Little Haiti. Oh, yeah. I've got so many of them, man. So off the top of my head, there was a time I can't recall if we were playing the show or if I was just attending a show there, but there were some homeless, we'll get real nice with it, and crack addicted individuals, if you will. getting into a fight, one of them in a wheelchair, and it ended up where like a Molotov cocktail was like thrown into the street. It was it gets pretty intense at Churchill's. Granted, they have cleaned the area up a bit. So in the last few years, they have done some remodeling. It looks a lot nicer than it did when I was 15, 16 and growing up and playing shows over there. But there's always a guy with about 7 teeth who is telling you where to park and telling you he's going to watch your car. And then you get back and you hear somebody's car was broken into and they had all kinds of shit stolen. But I had some of my favorite experiences there too, just hanging out with all of my friends, seeing some pretty big bands in a really small, really, like, for lack of a better shot, fucking venue, dude. This venue is not good, but people love to play there. It's a staple, and it's you knowing about Churchill's just kind of confirms that it's a well-known shit venue. And if you've ever been to a bathroom at Churchill's, you probably are immune to, I don't want to say corona, but there's lots of shit that you're immune to if you've ever used the bathroom there.
I remember not wanting to. and went to eat at a restaurant down the street and forced it out before the show, as we try to do.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out to Casey McGregor, who was our tour manager on that tour. I go for walks all the time when I'm on tour. I just leave the venue and just walk. And he's like, "You don't go anywhere today. You stay at the venue. You don't go anywhere." So shout out to Casey for keeping me safe at church.
Yeah, good looking out, Casey.
Another memory of that night was some fan just puking on stage in front of Ollie, my bassist.
Oh,
it was a fun night, but everything that you've said is absolutely rings true. What about your first time on stage? Do you remember that first show?
It was at Churchill's, man.
No way.
It was at Churchill's with my first local band. I was probably 15 or 16. The band was called Far Into Existence, which we just pulled from a Death lyric. We're huge fans of Death. And yeah, I've got vague memories of it. I've since smoked lots and lots of weed, so it's a little hazy, but it was a good time, and I remember just playing that first show and chasing that feeling ever since, you know.
That's why we do it, eh?
Yep.
That's why we do it. It's not for the money, that's for sure.
No. No, my wife can attest to that too.
What would be you're growing up in your parents' house or your guardian's house as a young child, you were not in control of the music. What would have been the soundtrack to your youth? What music was playing as you were growing up?
So before I started playing guitar and got into metal and things like that, my parents fairly young when they had me. So my parents were both 20 years old when they had me. So they very much grew up in the 80s and 90s in Miami. So a lot of the dance, hip hop, 80s kind of culture. So I grew up with a lot of hip hop and rap and that kind of stuff, listening to that stuff on my way to school in the morning and all that stuff. So my dad was a huge like Tupac, Biggie Smalls, Eminem fan. So I was probably 10 or 11 listening to Eminem records and shit like that. And then when I got into middle school, I met a buddy who was into more rock and like punk rock and classic rock and things like that. So I eventually just kind of drifted into that crowd and got into all the classic rock bands. I ended up falling in love with classic rock. So I was right around when I started playing guitar was like Led Zeppelin and Van Halen and Def Leppard and, you know, all those Queen, all those sick bands, Jimi Hendrix. That's when I started kind of really getting learned. And at the same time as well, like nu metal was kind of popping up too. So I started listening to bands like System of a Down and Mudvayne and a little bit of Slipknot here and there. I got into like Metallica and Megadeth and then all that stuff. And then I met some other guys in middle school who were twin brother musicians. one played guitar, one played bass, and they opened up my world to like prog. So I started listening to Symphony X and Dream Theater and Yngwie Malmsteen and all the solo guitar players, so like Steve Vai and Greg Howe and all those guys. So very early on, I kind of developed after listening to the classic rock. So I ended up kind of being a young dad, and then getting into the progressive and all that shit. I just turned into like a fucking snotbag elitist. It's like, if there's not 5-minute guitar solos, I don't want to listen to it. And then I started, and even with the harsh vocals, that kind of took a while to, the growls and the screams, that took a while to grow on me after listening to, again, the Dream Theaters and the Symphony X's and all the power metal dudes. And then I started listening to Death and Cynic, which again, Florida bands. And that kind of changed my whole world in regards to heavier and more aggressive music. And then Opeth came around and bands that, were really doing it differently. So
that's a
little long-winded.
No, it's a beautiful, beautiful journey. I love it. I had my father was so into Metallica that and then I became a nu metal child. So anything with a guitar solo was dad music for me. So I thought it wasn't cool. Until I finally got Train of Thought from Dream Theater.
There you go.
And that something clicked and I understood guitar solos again. Yeah, but huge nu metal child over here. Took me many years in the nu metal game.
Yeah. Mudvayne changed the game for me. I was like, this band is so sick. They were doing the nu metal thing, but it wasn't the same as everyone else. They obviously had that insane bass player, Ryan I don't want to say his last name is Martini, but that's what is coming to mind. And yeah, those guys. But then at the same time, I and the musicians that I had around me were just all about technical proficiency, and this song is fucking boring. It doesn't have a solo, and there's only 3 riffs in it. Why are there only 3 riffs in it? And I was like, yeah, I guess, shit. Well, I need to keep up with you guys with my guitar playing, so I need to start listening to all this shit.
And that pushed your playing too.
Yeah, it was great. Always trying to keep up with those 2 guys, and that has certainly permeated throughout my adult life too, and the musicians that I try and surround myself with. So the other guitar player, Matt, in Abiotic, for example, he's another guy I'm always trying to keep up with because he's a phenomenal player, and we've been writing music together now for about 8 to 10 years now, and yeah, his playing has certainly helped push my playing to the next level, and I think we feed off of each other very well. We're a great duo, I think, when it comes to writing music.
So that sounds like it's something that guitarists are lucky to have, something where they can bounce back and forth and grow together, whereas like a drummer or a vocalist or a bassist only has other people in other bands to compete against.
Yeah, that's fair. I've never even thought about it that way, where we're actually the only guys that have somebody else in the band
to help grow together,
Yeah.
As opposed to being inspired by other people. You can't rip off your own band member.
Right. Exactly.
Whereas we all get inspired elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So you can when you're feeding off of each other and inspiring each other, it just makes for better music for your band, and it's not necessarily even consciously or subconsciously where you're listening to another artist in maybe any of the other instruments in a band, and you can easily pull from that without even knowing.
What would be one of your favorite tours that you've done and you would like to go relive? Because it was either so much fun or so shitty that it's funny now, and all the stories from that shitty tour are in your arsenal, so you must keep it and redo it.
So we've had lots of shitty tours that I don't know I would want to relive. I'd say, those tours did put some hair on our chests. They did. There were learning lessons throughout all those rough tours. My favorite tour that we did easily was our European tour. It's the only European tour that we've done. We did it. It was about 5 years ago now. or 5 years ago now with suffocation and cattle decapitation. So sick. It was our first tour on a bus. It was our first tour in Europe. Never experienced anything like it, where I could just put all my stuff in a bunk and it would stay there and never move and I would never lose it. And after the show, I could just crawl into bed and go to sleep and sleep for a full 8 hours and wake up in a new country, just rested and ready to tackle the day. It was very different than obviously what we'd been doing for 4 straight years prior, which is just van life, toughing it out, sleeping in a bunk. We rarely stayed at a hotel. We, would often stay at fans' houses, but if not, we were in the van. And if you were driving that night and we were stopping somewhere to park to get some rest, if it was your drive, you sat in the driver's seat and you slept in the driver's seat. And so that was the one tour where that moment was like, wow, like this is what it's like to do this shit for real. And the shows were incredible. The Suffo and the cattle guys are, I think, some of our closer friends now. Terrence from Suffocation is my fucking homeboy, is my buddy. I love that guy. And it was, like I said, it was an eye opener. And then also we got to see some of the most beautiful places in the world. I got to go hiking through some castles in Switzerland and see Germany and see Italy and Poland and all of the places that I know I would never be able to see if I wasn't doing what I was doing.
Tourism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the best.
And
you don't stop walking.
Exactly. Yeah, we try.
Keep walking.
The band for the most part, unless we're kind of beat up from the day before or someone's not feeling well or whatever it is, we try and do our best to explore as much as we can and really take in the different sites, the different cultures, different food, different beer, different weed, whatever, experience it, because we have had a lot of struggles coming up as a band. So taking it for granted is not something that I would ever allow myself to do.
What would be some of those biggest struggles? You mentioned the band's been running for 11 years. I can imagine member changes.
Honestly, a lot of it comes financial struggles from maybe not great decisions that we made early on. So if there's any piece of advice that I can give to a band, which I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice, but any piece of advice I would give to a band is invest in a reliable vehicle. That was really a big part of what made what we were doing so difficult. We were all broke and wanted to do this, so we did what we had to do to get out there. But for the first probably 3 years, we relied on $2,000 vans that were good for maybe 2 tours and then took a shit on us. So can't tell you how many tours that we poured our entire life savings into fixing a transmission or into... We got stranded in New York once. So upstate New York, the rear axle of our van, which was a conversion van at the time, split in half, just like broke completely. So we were stranded at a Denny's and all of us are on Craigslist looking for another van to try and buy. And everyone is calling their parents and family members, and there wasn't GoFundMe at the time. So it was just like, call everybody to see if they can pitch in fucking like $200 so we can try and get a vehicle to make it back home. And we had posted something on Facebook and we were like, hey, we're stranded here, upstate New York. We were between Buffalo and Albany, I think. And we posted something just on a whim, like, hey, if there's anybody out here who can help us out, maybe put us up with a place to sleep, because we're just like sitting in a Denny's right now. And we had these 2 fans reach out that they lived very close by, and we could not have been luckier. And this is kind of a little bit of a long story, but it's a crazy one. So they came with their uncle, I think it was. He came and picked up our trailer, because we had a 6x12 trailer with us at the time. So came, picked up our trailer with all of our gear, took it back to their house. They put us up for, I want to say, almost a week. So it was like probably 5 or 6 days they put us up at their house. and they drove us around for probably 2 or 3 days to different places to try and find a van to be able to make it back home. And in the meantime, there was a show going on locally. They got us on that show to try and make a little bit of money. So we just played like a random show at like this weird theater. Didn't even really fit the bill at all, but they were just like, hey, maybe you can sell some merch, like just play a show. Just, you guys have your gear, just do it. And we ended up, so we found this van on Craigslist that was up in the mountains in upstate New York. So we had, one of these guys drive us up there, and this guy, it was on like probably an acre or two of land, and this guy had the craziest collection of pretty much everything I've ever seen in my life. So on the property, he had 2 houses. He had like his house where he stayed. Then he had another house full of just antiques. It looked like a full antique store lined from floor to ceiling with all kinds of crazy shit. He had a garage with 2 floor model Mustangs that he had bought just that year, just in the garage. And then the ceiling of the garage was lined with comic books.
Really?
Hanging from like clothes hangers in plastic, like first edition comic books.
Wow.
He had an entire warehouse of cars stacked on top of each other. So he had like a separate little warehouse of cars stacked on top of each other. He had a World War II like kind of Jeep, and he had a tank on the property. A tank, like not even a fucking joke.
Holy shit. What was his address and what was his security system like?
He had a couple of dogs, and he was up in the mountains. Like it took us quite a while to get there. Lots of crazy twisty turny tight roads to get up to where he was. And then he had like 8 vans, 15 passenger vans for sale. So he actually took our van off of our hands for probably like $500 or something, took $500 off of the price of another van that he had. And we bought that van. On the way back to the place we were staying, one of the tires fucking blow.
Unbelievable.
So, I'm telling you, this is just the one tour. So one of the tires blow, so we have to pull in, drop another bunch of money to get another tire, and then end up, being able to make it back home, with that van. So a crazy experience, and all those memories are still super vivid for me just because of how crazy that turned out. I'd never seen anything like it before, as far as like all the shit that this guy had. But it was one of those things that you think back on, and we've got a pretty reliable van now, or we're in a position where if we needed to, we could probably rent something or something like that because we're doing a little bit better. But when we were on the up, it's those struggles and how you get through them that really defines you, and it's the make or break for a lot of bands, really,
and a lot of members.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's I wouldn't doubt that that's some of the reason why there was some member changes in the band, just financial struggles. It's, if there's no return for a little while, obviously any business, you have to, invest money in it to make money, and people can only invest before seeing a return for so long. So it's understandable to a degree, Do
you remember the name of those 2 fans?
Jared and Travis.
Huge shout out to Jared and Travis for being out there for their metal bands that they love. Massive shout out. That's really, really cool what you guys did. And your uncle.
Massive shout out. Oh yeah. Love those guys. We still keep in contact with them. They've come out to some shows of ours since, and they're guest list for life, guys.
Absolutely. You should just mail them every release.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go back to the Big Shred podcast.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges getting this up off the ground and keeping it rolling?
So really, we're just starting. I'm streaming live with our 6th episode tonight. So I kind of just fell into doing it this way, where I really enjoy the live streams. I enjoy the kind of, pressure or just, being live and having that. It's almost like being on stage too. It's like you get that adrenaline because There's no
safety net
editing. There's no like changes. There's no, oh, well, you know, fuck that. We can just cut it out. And so that's also been a challenge though. So keeping things rolling and getting comfortable with my voice and getting, you know it as well. If we're doing this, and I do edit the episodes afterward to put them on the streaming sites, and just listening to your own speaking voice gets just strange and tiresome. And
I guess I'm more used to it because I'm a singer, but
that's fair. But you start to hear the things you do to fill space and the little nuances that you say, you know, with things that you say. So working on those things, to me being a guitar player, even though I've been somewhat, I guess I'll say, the face of our band in one way or another. So I've done interviews from the other side, so something like this. So I felt like I had a little bit of a leg up starting it, because I was like, oh, I've done this shit 100 times on the other side, so I think I can put together a few questions, and not underestimating it, of course, because it is a challenge in itself. And aside from that, it's been a lot of fun. It's been great getting to talk more in depth with people that I've been friends with or been acquainted with. And usually it's, if they're on a tour or if I'm on a tour, it's just like there's always so much going on, so we can talk for like 20 minutes, or we're in a venue and it's really loud and we can't really like get into a good conversation. So I've been able to have an hour plus conversations with guys that I've wanted to for a long time, with friends that I've wanted to for a long time. And the goal for it, for sure, that, you know, what started it was to try and help the friends that I did have in bands and crew members and all that stuff, to promote what other alternative streams of revenue and things like that they have going on right now during this whole coronavirus thing, with all the tours that have been canceled, and specifically for crew who have just completely lost their jobs. You know, band members, for the most part, you can give lessons online, you're still selling merch, but all those guys that are integral parts of what we do, that are part of the crew, they've had their income just completely diminish, and for who knows how long.
And when they're not on tour with artists, they're working at local venues. 100%
right, exactly,
of the time,
like Alex.
100% of the time that happens. Shout out to Mr. Kendrick.
Yeah, shout out to Mr. Kendrick. He's the man.
Absolutely, yes. Who would be a milestone guest for you to interview? Who would be a dream guest?
Good question. A dream guest. Okay, I would want to interview Michael from Opeth. That would be huge. I would want to interview James from Metallica. I'm not even that huge of a Metallica fan anymore, but just the stories with that guy, I'm sure would be, and talking with his battles with addiction and things like that, I think would be really eye-opening. And yeah, my goal for a lot of this too, among all the other things, is to, and I'm sure yours to some extent as well, is to give people insight into the mind of a lot of these guys that seem so much on a pedestal, right? And even for guys like us, right? Like somebody like James or somebody like Michael or a number of the other gigantic bands that were like, fuck, like, I wonder what they're like. Are they assholes? Are they not assholes? What are they really like? And getting those folks, especially in metal where it's a little taboo, getting those folks vulnerable, getting them talking about things that, you know, they might not talk about otherwise. Or if you're doing a regular interview with someone you don't really know at a venue on tour, you're just expecting the same 10 questions. How's the tour going? And how's the new album going? Are you guys working on any other music? And you can kind of just get into a routine of answering these questions, and it becomes less and less, it has less and less substance, you know?
I absolutely agree. I love to that's what Vox&Hops was all about, to get behind the persona, to show off to the world the people that I actually know, the characters that I actually know, versus the person that's on stage.
Right, exactly.
There's all these memes of the angry vocalist and then the little puppy off stage.
Yeah.
So that's 100% of the time, and I've interviewed over probably 140, 145 people at this point.
Holy shit.
Everyone has been nice. Everyone has been just straightforward, nice, open, and honest, which there's been rarely a time that a person says, I don't want to answer that question. So, and I strive to not answer those shitty 10 questions.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. That's what I've been, we go back to the podcast and challenges. That's also a challenge, right? It's making an interesting interview without asking those, again, shitty questions, and also being mindful of questions that folks may not want to be asked. There's going to be those questions that it's like, I probably shouldn't go that route, or how can I approach getting an answer to a question like that without it sounding that you're asking the same shitty question that they're trying to avoid answering in like all the other interviews.
I always like to poke the snake about 20 minutes into an interview. Most of the time I have a spicy question that I want to ask. So I try to ask it in the nicest way, and I always offer a way out if they don't want to. But most of the time people embark. It's something about a podcast versus an interview that people get so comfortable.
Yeah, because it's less of a snippet. It's less of a one-liner. They can provide context. They can give their full side of a story or of a reasoning behind something. And it's less of a soundbite, really.
And then it's so annoying, these written interviews. We're in 2020. We shouldn't have to do written interviews anymore. I think when I release a new record, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just record myself answering the questions. I'm going to be like, type it out. One last question. What is your hangover cure?
My hangover cure is, I rarely get a hangover, honestly, because I don't drink super hard, but certainly some weed will fix me right up if I have that hangover, that headache kind of queasy kind of feeling. And leftover pizza, if there's some around, it's usually or just like a real greasy breakfast, like eggs and bacon and all that stuff.
John, thank you so much for sitting down with me, sharing a craft brew, talking about your life, your music, and craft beer, and your podcast. Everyone check out the Big Shred podcast. There are going to be a bunch of new episodes coming out every Wednesday, I want to say.
Yeah, we're live streaming Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, the Abiotic Facebook page, our Twitch, and our YouTube. And then those episodes will get put up on the Spotifys and the Apple Podcasts and all that stuff afterward.
Good. I wish you longevity to the podcast. Keep it up. I like what you're doing, and I know many other people do as well.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me and for putting all of us in the same room, so to speak, on getting podcasts going and having these conversations. And it means a lot. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Cheers, brother.
Cheers, man.
Hey, thank you all so much for listening right to the end. You know that I love and appreciate that. John's such a cool dude. I love it. I love his podcast. You guys should absolutely go check that out. Like, subscribe, all of those following things. The Big Shred podcast. It is amazing. You should be there. You should be a part of it. He does it live. It is wild. I love it. I was a part of it. I have been on it. It is amazing, and I'm stoked about that. Huge cheers to John. Keep it going. I love it. And cheers to Abiotic. I'm a fan. I can't wait to hear more. I hope that you guys have a great weekend. I'm stoked to relax. It has been an intense week being back at work after 11 weeks. I'm recuperating. I'm ready for next week. But until then, I'll be back at you with 2 episodes next week, as I spoke about in the intro, one on Tuesday and one on Friday. But until then, remember to enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. Cheers, Vox and Hops.